Okay, good morning. I'm going to get started on rendering further on this figure drawing of Tracy. And what I like to do oftentimes when I draw is once I get the shadow mass postered in, and if I'm working with charcoal or chalk on tone paper, I like to key the drawing early on by getting the lightest light in place in the drawing. So I'm going to be, I'm just preparing the drawing now for the addition of some white chalk. And that means I want to get any residue of red chalk out of the way. So let's also check out the two different types of white chalk I'm going to use. So I've got two chalk pencils here, a white one and a cream one. So these are Carbothello number 100 for the white, number 105 for the cream white. I like to start by using the cream white at first because it's going to be warmer in temperature, and it's also a little bit darker than the full white. So just checking to see if that shows up on screen well enough. So here I'm putting the cream white down the trapezius, where there's a pretty bold highlight there, and I'll be turning up the lightness of that soon. And now we come to this corner of the scapula where we see the intersection of the medial border of the scapula and the spine of the scapula. Spine of the scapula here is foreshortening away from us pretty quickly. So it's traveling away in space really rapidly as it goes forward towards the shoulder. We also have a prominent light on the back here at C7. So C7 is creating a pretty strong punctuation. Now I'm kind of making an edit. I'm moving up C7 a little higher. I guess I'm not. This edge is where the bottom of that dark light is, and the actual highlight on C7 itself is there. And we see a couple of other lights here falling on the cervical vertebra just above C7. So the next thing up is C6. So we have a light on C6, we have a light on C7. Just outside of this boundary here is a nice bright light on part of the trapezius, and it comes abutting right up to that edge of where the C7 is. So these forms are strongly facing towards the light source, and they're going to get a lot of light. If you see a little pinkish tone occur, it just means that you've accidentally mixed it with the red chalk. Maybe you had some dust there or a stray red chalk line that you missed. You can go back and erase that out if you don't want that pinkish color. I like to try to keep the organization of the white very clear, so I'm not mixing the white chalk with either my black or my red chalk, depending on what I'm drawing with. Still, we're on the form of the trapezius here, bright light. And trapezius often can feel like it has a connector here from the scapula over to the C7. And I'm just trying to keep this relegated towards the brighter lights. I do want the paper to do some work in this drawing. So I don't want to just completely blanket the drawing with mixtures of this white chalk and and red chalk. I want to let the paper be part of it. I feel that there's enough light here on the spine of the scapula, on this side, to warrant using it here. And I think this is a good example of where we might just want the cream chalk alone. If you look at the video of Tracy, the kind of light that we see here on the spine of the scapula is it's a prominent light, but it certainly doesn't compete with the brightest of them. So this is one tactic I often use, is I sort of lay down a base of the cream where I want the lights to go, and then I plan on layering this with the bright white, and that'll give me access to brighter values. So now we turn down here and we go onto the medial border of the scapula, creating a little plane that sticks out from the body. And a nice light here in this area called the triangle of auscultation. We're getting a really nice light showing up there, right up against this inferior boundary of the trapezius. So this dark shadow is being caused by one of the boundaries of the trapezius. The trapezius is going to go like that. So right as it crosses this triangle of auscultation, it's going to show up in high relief. I feel like we're getting a bright enough light here on the teres major muscle that I may address it with a little bit of the cream chalk. And then the surface of the scapula, where this bulge here is the infraspinatus muscle. I think the value there is probably more appropriately left just as the paper itself. All right, now let's revisit these areas that are really bright with the white chalk. So I think that the highest light that I'm seeing is here on the C7 and on C6. Very bright. So I'm reinforcing them with whites, going brighter value now. And this whole area, this whole trapezius on our right side, it's very bright. The other reason why I really like the white chalk in combination with the cream is that we get two temperature differences, because the white is a cold white and the cream is a warm white. And that's very consistent with what we see in behavior of light, is that the direct light falling on the form in areas of what we call general light or light light, where the light rays are very strongly impacting the surface at either perpendicularly or 45 degrees, where we get general light and light light. We usually see the temperature of the local color of the model's body, which is going to be warm, because flesh tones, whatever flesh tones they are going to be somewhere in the range of hues of brown, orange, pink, tan, yellows, reds. It was all warm colors. The highlight is oftentimes in classical art is cool light. It's north light, or it's lights, like the kind of lights I use in the studio simulate north light, so they're cool temperature. And they will show up, the temperature of the light will show up in the highlight, where we see a cold light. So I've got the two temperatures of light working now in the drawing. I've got a warm and a cool. The cream is not so bright, and the white is very bright. Now this is helping me to set the key of the drawing. I'm able to understand where my brightest lights will be and how bright I want them to be, and therefore I now know where the paper is going to sit and do its work. And in very masterful drawings, a lot of times we notice that the paper is doing a lot of the work. And people sort of marvel at, how almost like it feels like the artist did very little. And yet the drawing looks really great. So it's good if we can try to get as much of the paper doing as much work as we can. So now that we have a little bit of the keying of the drawing, we can go back to our rendering with the red chalk. Though before I do that, I'm going to take my blending brush that I reserved for white chalk, my small one, and I'm just going to pass over some of these areas and soften them. And I'm thinking about kind of integrating them onto the form. And I like to, when I build up my chalk or charcoal, I like to go back and forth between blending and hatching, and then blending again, and then hatching again. So I often build up the layers a couple times. You can even hatch with your brush like this to feel the structure of the form. Hatches that follow the topography of the form. We're also, just simply put, we're trying to make a little bit of transition off of these white chalk areas into the paper smoothly, so there's no abrupt placements of white chalk that end up looking spotty or harsh. We want to get nice, smooth transitions, soft transitions. So it's good to work the transitions out with the brush. And then you'll notice when you do that, your white chalk's going to kind of go away a little bit. It won't be as vibrant as it was. And then you come back and you reapply it. This can be done many times. Now, sometimes I notice that the white chalk sort of stops going on. Like I can't get any more of it to go on. That's very common with pastel, any kind of pastel drawing. At a certain point, the material, the amount of pastel or chalk on the page reaches a critical mass, and it won't accept anymore. And what you should do, is spray the drawing lightly with fixative. And then you'll notice when the fixative has dried, you can make a new layer on top of the previously applied chalk, and you can build it up now thicker and continue to develop the form. So that's something you may want to try in this drawing if you feel like your white chalk just won't build up any further. Okay, and so back to some of our red chalk. So here I bring in, I'm going to start with this Tuscan red pencil again. I'm going to see how that behaves for me. I want to see if it is dark enough. If it's not dark enough, I will switch to one of my more deeper reds. But I'm going to take the red chalk pencil. I'm going to make sure it's got a good point on it by sanding. Okay, and the best place for us to start this is here at the terminator and the core shadow. So we want to develop a core shadow. We also want to deepen the value. And we also want to, as always, we want to improve the shape if we can. We're searching for any edits to the shape itself. And I want to say we're trying to preserve the accuracy and specificity of the shape. I think that's a good thing to emphasize because so many people, when they start rendering, things just get mushy and everything gets blended, and specific angles like this end up becoming just an ambiguous S curve instead of angle, 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 angle. And so I want to say that the longer you can hang on to your angles and intensify them, and really just maintaining specificity is important, because the rendering process is going to soften and organicize the drawing, even without trying to. So it'll happen naturally, that part. We don't have to worry about that. What we do have to worry about is maintaining specificity. It's the same with painting. We have to really, when we start to model with the paint, we quickly lose specificity of form. So we have to try to fight for maintaining the clarity of shape. So we are deepening the value now. Now what you'll start to learn about red chalk is that it's not a dark value really, compared to black charcoal. It's only like a value 7 or 8 on a 9 value scale, where 9 is black. Red chalk, depending on the shade of the chalk, it only makes it to like 7 or 8. If you take a black and white photograph of it and compare it in the black and white photograph to the black, it's not going to be black. So we want to be careful not to reach. I find we don't want to reach critical value with the red and then do that everywhere. Otherwise, things start flattening out. So if you feel that you have to go deeper and darker in value in any given spot, and your chalk is not doing it for you, you'll want to switch to the next darker red chalk that you have available to you. I'm going to soften this edge a little bit. I have my red chalk brush here, and I want to try to just turn this transition just past the terminator into the half light. Yeah, and I can also blend over what I've just hatched, and I should see the red chalk deepening a little bit. It also seems to morph colors into a little bit of a warmer tone when we brush over this. I'm using the lighter Tuscan red. And now I'm hatching in a little bit of dark lights here, just below the spine of the scapula. I have to pause here and there and restart my video. So remember that we want to try to find places for the paper to do the work. So I'm thinking that values in here may likely be where I want to just show paper value. We can kind of use that on the drawing to compare other places to it. Though it's not a dogmatic rule.
It's 11 o'clock.
If you suddenly discover that you need to go over this with a layer of tone for whatever reason, because the drawing is becoming a darker key, you should do that. But we're trying to find out where the paper could be left in place as an operative value. Here we're going to show the difference between a form shadow, which travels along the teres major muscle, and then we see a cast shadow here. It's a little bit of a sharp edge on the shadow for a moment. Can get the eraser in here and try to preserve the shape of that. I feel like this needs to push back out a little bit more here. So it's okay to use the eraser to shape. And I'm continuing all the way down with the core shadow. And a dark accent here between the arm and the rib cage. Now let's take a look at what would happen if I start to deepen the color here. So I'm going to take out one of my Venetian red pencils, and you can see that where you might need darker values, like in the core shadow here, around the shoulder, you can start to now access those darker values. And it opens up the value range of the drawing so that we now have a bigger value range from a darker value all the way up to the white value. Remember that the core shadow that we're making here is not a stripe. It shouldn't be a pinstripe on the form. It goes in and out of different behaviors. Occasionally it is a pinstripe. Like here could be an appropriate moment for it to have a very stripe-like quality because it's wrapping around the acromion process right there. So that light is the acromion process. And then it goes on to the rounder, fuller deltoid. And so the planes and the structures are going to open up and become fuller and rounder. And so the core shadow will take on behaviors that are similar to that kind of structure where it gets bigger and rounder. So the core shadow is just going to follow the behavior of the form that it sits on. If it's corner-like in a bony place, like the knee or the shoulder girdle, then it often does look stripe-like. But in fleshier forms, muscular forms, or big round fat forms, the core shadow opens up and becomes a wider presence. I like this dark accent here because it overlaps. It's what it is the teres major muscle. It's also a little bit of the latissimus dorsi coming up from here, and those two wrap each other here. This latissimus dorsi comes up and it cups the teres major, and they both go into the armpit to insert on the front of the humerus. So we get a little overlap here, and then we see a little bit of the outline of latissimus dorsi. It's going to leave there and go all the way to the sacrum, and then we see the actual outline of the rib cage itself. Okay, now we can hatch that in, and I can also blend that in and integrate it into the tones that I've been making all along. Let's see if in this drawing if we can experiment with a little bit of Van Dyke's treatment of edges. Where is he going thick and dark and heavy? In the last drawing, he might have, the equivalent place might be something like that, where he'd go really dark and thick, because we're seeing muscular forms in shadow, and they're thick and dark. And then places where the bone, something like a hard bone in shadow, like the tip of the elbow, is like a sharp, severe line. And then other places where the muscle is out in shadow and big round forms, but maybe far away, not at focus here. So maybe we want to go fuzzier, or we want to show like multiple iterations of the line in a more pentamenti form. So we can experiment with the kind of line work we see. Very sharp here as we wrap over chromion process. And then we would see a little bit of the head of the clavicle from the front is causing a tiny little bump here. If you look at Tracy's pose, you'll see a little tiny bump right about there. Yeah, and we're catching the clavicle from the front doing that. Going back to my more warm, lighter red now. So you can go back and forth. You don't have to just stick on one of them. You can really do anything you feel like you need to do. There's no rules of do's and don'ts here, other than try not to mix the white and the red. I think if you do that, you'll see what happens. You start to get a pink, and then it seems like you kind of have to mix that everywhere, and it gets out of control real fast. This form, this shadow, is a nice lateral boundary to the spinal erector group that we talked about in lecture. It's a really nice depiction of the spinal erector muscles, which should sit here. But here and here, we see their boundaries as they run up and down the back. Okay, so you get a sense of how to work with the red chalk and the paper and the white chalk, hatching, blending, looking at linear quality on the edge of the drawing. And I will let you move forward into the rendering process of this, and I will also check back in and show you my progress as I go along.